On Friday of last week, the town that I grew up in, a very small rural town of just over 2,000 people, made the national news. Now, unfortunately, the reason that it made the news is not exactly a good reason. A horrific EF2 tornado formed just to the west of the town in the mid-afternoon hours, and in a matter of minutes, it barreled down upon the 1 mile square village, causing an incredible amount of damage. Now, I suppose, pun intended, it was a perfect storm of situations. School was in session. All three schools in the consolidated school district located in that area, composed of students from four neighboring communities, were in the school in that town. Not only was school in session, but there was also a band and choir contest being held in the school that day. A day-long event that saw busloads of students arriving and departing at different times throughout the day. And actually, in the moments just before the tornado touched down, there were bands and choirs performing in that school building. The roof of the building where those bands and choirs were performing was actually severely damaged. A portion of the roof lifted off of that building. Of course, at the same time, life was moving at a normal pace in town that day. Businesses were open, serving customers. Gas stations were open. The local medical clinic was staffed with its doctors and its nurses and caring for patients. Churches were busily preparing for weekend services. Restaurants were readying themselves for the Friday evening rush. Then, I think in what probably felt like the blink of an eye, everything changed. Tornado sirens were blaring, the skies turned ominous and green, winds gusted, rain poured down, and then chaos. For a brief few moments, nothing could be seen. Debris was flying everywhere, dust and dirt swirled around, trees fell, roofs collapsed. And then, as quickly as the storm had come, it was gone. I'm told, in fact, the sun even shone almost immediately after the storm passed. Of course, it didn't take long for news to break because of social media. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm still not sure. Even from a distance of a few hundred miles away, I was able to watch the entire situation unfold. My heart sank. I know those streets. They are the streets that I learned to ride my bike on. They're the streets that my friends and I pretended that we were members of the volunteer fire department, and we would race to the fire station every time we heard the fire whistle go off. I know the people who owned the homes that were being shown in the pictures of the devastation. I have eaten at the restaurant. I've worshiped at some of those churches. I've been cared for by doctors and nurses in that medical building. This wasn't just another dot on the map. This was, at one time, my home. And then I stopped to think for just a moment. I have not lived in this town since I was 18. I'm 44. I have lived away from this place longer than I ever lived there. Now, I may visit there from time to time, but I'm actually a stranger there. If watching these events unfold from a distance away, but not having to actually live through these events, not having to actually deal with the results and the impact of these storms, not having to actually clear the downed trees and discard the lost food because of lost power, or clean the standing water and the debris from the places that it shouldn't be. If watching all of this from a distance was hard for me, and I'm not having to participate in any of this, just imagine how hard this must be for those who are living it. Friends, what has taken place throughout my state over the last couple of weeks or so has been terrible. We've seen incredible amounts of rain, flooding, record proportions of rain and flooding, record numbers of tornadoes, historic tornadoes. And then to top it off, we've had temperature swings from 80 degrees one day to just 26 degrees overnight last night. Certainly we have been forced to face the storm, to weather the storm. All of this leads me to my topic for this episode of Monday Musings for today, Monday, April 20th, 2026. What does God's Word have to say for the stormy moments of our lives? I'm Pastor Jeremy Heitkam. This is Monday Musings. I am so glad that you are here with me today. When it comes to the stormy moments of our lives, of course, I can't help but think of Jesus' powerful command over the storm in Luke's gospel. Luke chapter 4, beginning at verse 35. It says, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up. The waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" Perhaps there are some things that we fail to consider when we think about this particular moment in Jesus' earthly ministry. For example, this storm, it must have been a pretty powerful storm. It's highly unlikely that it was just another storm because, for example, as the great biblical scholar Dr. Warren Wiersbe points out, this storm that's described here must have been especially fierce if it frightened experienced fishermen like the disciples. I think also, while Jesus did calm the elements of the storm, he didn't just stop there. He didn't just cause the winds to die down or the rain to stop, or because they were at sea, he didn't just cause the waves to become still. He did, in fact, do all of that stuff, but he went a step further. He calmed also the anxious hearts of the disciples. In fact, again, Dr. Wiersbe suggests to us, he says, the greatest danger in this storm was not the wind or the waves, it was the unbelief in the hearts of the disciples. Our greatest problems, Dr. Wiersbe says, are within us, not around us. And this explains why Jesus greatly rebuked them and asked them, "Do you still have no faith?" They had heard him teach the word and had even seen him perform miracles, yet they still had no faith. It was their unbelief that caused their fear, and their fear made them question whether or not Jesus really cared. You know, there's a reality about this life for us, and it's that storms do come. In fact, there are periods of life when storms can be frequent. Perhaps we would call those our tornado seasons. They are the moments when things seem around us to be falling apart. unexpected difficulties come, terrible accidents may happen, we incur tremendous loss, we fail to meet our goals or our aspirations. Here in northern Illinois, where I live, tornado season is technically from the beginning of March through the end of May. However, the truth is, tornadoes can happen and do happen at just about any time of the year. In fact, in recent years, we have been under tornado warnings in November, even one time in January, in February. Just like tornadoes, while difficult moments have seasons in our lives, we have moments when conditions are favorable. The meteorologists, when we get to tornado season, that's something that they often talk about. Conditions are favorable for producing tornadic activity. We can often talk about our lives, ourselves, finding ourselves in moments where our lives are in conditions that are favorable for stormy weather. Frustration, fear, anxiety, worry, sin. It all creeps in on us in those favorable condition moments. And in those moments, we find ourselves on the deck of the boat, just like the disciples here in Mark 4. Waves crashing over us, wind blowing, the sails about, and it's easy to feel as if God is just like Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat in the midst of our storm. I have no idea what the pastors of the churches in my hometown said to their congregations yesterday as they met together just a day and a half after that tornado came through. I do know that they met together in cold sanctuaries without power, with the remnants of tornadic activity all around them. But I have to imagine among the things that they were faced with was that age-old question that always comes up in the midst of a storm. Where is God in all of this? After all, isn't that essentially the question that the disciples asked Jesus here in Mark 4 that night on the boat? The disciples asked Jesus, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus' response to them was a pointed, powerful, and purposeful response. He says, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" This powerful example from Jesus' ministry to the disciples is, I think, perhaps the classic example of faith versus fear from God's word. Here in Mark's record of the gospel, we have this faith and fear situation where faith and fear are two very different things. Mark seems to tell us that faith and fear cannot coexist. I mean, simply put, if the disciples truly believed in Jesus and truly knew him for who he really was, they would not be afraid. They would instead have every confidence because, in fact, God was literally right there with them on the boat. See, what Jesus asserts in his question to them makes clear to us that simply because the disciples possess fear, they actually demonstrate that they're not possessing faith. In fact, their very next actions, the last things that they do in the midst of this passage in Mark 4:41, it proves something to us. Mark 4:41 recalls that the disciples were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this person?" Jesus, who is this person? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Now, some Bible commentaries have offered a bit of grace to the disciples in this moment, suggesting that instead of their being completely without faith in Jesus, they were sort of once again just bowled over, surprised, because they were here now in awe as they learned something more about Jesus and what he was capable of. So while they were very full of fear, a feeling something like disbelief came over them because something was being revealed to them about God, about Jesus, that they had not experienced before. He isn't just teacher. He is Messiah, but he isn't just the kind of Messiah that they had been taught about and been hoping for and been longing for. He is this kind of Messiah that possesses power, so much more power than they had ever expected. That's earth-shaking. That's life-altering. That's mind-exploding kind of revelation. I mean, no wonder they were filled with this certain kind of terror, this awe-striking fear. So what's the point? Well, I bet if you were to talk with people from my hometown today, as they continue today the cleanup efforts from the storm, I bet you'd hear a mix of things. You'd almost certainly hear some people asking yet again, that age-old question, God, how could you let this happen? Where are you in the midst of all of this? Did you just leave us? Just like the disciples, they're probably asking, doesn't God care about us? But at the same time, I'll bet there are many who are standing back today and in awe and in wonder, just like the disciples did on the boat that night, because in the midst of the storm, they experienced something about God they've never experienced before. You see, in the midst of this tornado, not one person lost their life. And the injuries that have been reported, they're incredibly minor. Not one ambulance left town that day for the local hospital. I think just like the disciples on the boat that night in the middle of that storm, there are folks in my hometown, I think, who have witnessed God working in power for them in a way that until now, maybe they've never experienced before. And that's the thing about storms. They're awful. They're destructive. They come out of nowhere. They inflict pain. They don't discriminate when they attack. And we are left to clean up the mess in the wake of their aftermath. But if we are willing to just take a step back from all of the destruction and all of the chaos and all of the debris and all of the fear and all of the worry and all of the anxiety and all of the everything that the storm creates, just long enough, I think we will find God right there at work in the midst of it, powerfully, in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the destruction. In fact, Jesus reminds us that in this world we will have troubles. But those troubles are no reason for us to fear because he has already overcome each one of them for us. Psalm 46 reminds us that God is our refuge and our strength, the very present help in time of trouble. No matter how fervently the wind blows or how torrent the rain may be, God is still in control. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Where's God in the middle of the storm? That's where he is. In the middle, with us, right there, working, proving himself yet again, so that we can stand back in awe and experience him in a way that we have never experienced him before. I want to thank you for joining me once again today for this episode of Monday Musings. I want to ask you if you'd be willing to pray alongside me for the people of Illinois, of northern Illinois and central Illinois, who have been hit hard by some tornadoes and strong storms over the last week. Other places too throughout the Midwest that have been hit by heavy, heavy rains and strong storms. If you haven't had a chance yet to click that subscribe button, we'd love for you to do that so that every time we go live for worship here at Cornerstone Faith Community Church, or we post one of these episodes, you'll be notified of it right away. But until we meet again, may the God who is right there with us in the middle of every storm hold you in the palm of his hand. Thanks for joining me.